The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. What's happening? Benton here. I couldn't figure out if I should go live because I did not know if I had anything to say, which is not the same as it's interesting because oftentimes I know that I don't have anything to say, hence no live stream. And then other times I have something to say and the timing is not appropriate. You know, maybe it's too late in the day. Other matters are more pressing. So I figured I probably should go live and see what happens. And I'm not reading the comments for now, uh, just so folks know. Perhaps near the end, I will take a gander at the comments. Yeah, I'm not feeling so great today. I guess I've gotten used to feeling so fantastic. And almost every, waking up early in the morning and just laying in my back seat of this Nissan Versa parked on the streets of Los Angeles, and sort of it's been many days now, many mornings of the blessing of just very calm, peaceful, relaxed, right? Actively enjoying the lack of tension in the tissues. And I seem to have acquired a bit of tension in the tissues this morning. I'm sure it's all for the best. My knees, especially, my joints are letting me know that I'm probably not doing enough walking, probably not moving around enough. So, could be doing that right now, of course. So after this stream, we will most likely, the royal we will take a stroll. How about that? I trust that everyone is doing well today, in spite of, the challenges, or perhaps because of the challenges of the day. I should not assume that a challenge would be a bad thing. And also, speaking of challenges, perhaps I can work on my ability to speak, to perform these live streams at something, you know, less than a yell with my loud ass voice. So hopefully I can be heard, although I would assume so. Shout out to the chat, shout out to the replay crew. Appreciate folks listening to my ideas. And I would say I'm certainly, at the risk of speaking in cliche, at peace, certainly experiencing little to no anger, rage, frustration, especially compared to the past. And for those who may not know, or I don't know how clear I've made it, that in my early days as a young man, I would say all through my 20s, certainly well into my 30s, um, I had a lot of anger, a lot of pent up rage, frustration, wrath, right? Um, very bad temper for much of my life. Although I did manage to teach myself to mostly control my temper, or to control my temper, I would say by my late 20s. Yeah, it was so powerful, right? Very strong. I seem to be on the, or I was, not now. Seems like I was on the, kind of the higher end of the ability to become very, very, very angry, which, that can be an alluring, it feels kind of good sometimes. those states of anger, but certainly not desirable overall. And then, as the royal we knows, right? Um, the damage done to the body, messing up the hormones and the stress responses. And um, in fact, I remember by the time I was in my mid 20s, I'd gotten so unhealthy with my diet, and most of my jobs were customer service related. And if something happened, I remember like at work, if I got an adrenaline dump, 'cause, sometimes things can get confrontational. It did not happen a lot, but I can remember, at least one time I had a big lunch, ate like a whole pizza or whatever. So, you know, and I was obese at the time. Folks may not know that I was um, actually managed to become quite fat in my 20s, but something happened at work. I remember, got an adrenaline dump, and then once that wore off, I was just completely like worthless for the rest of the day, just like totally useless. So now, at almost the age of 50 and 15 something years of these various spiritual practices, I certainly have, mechanisms in place to, and that's gone anyway. That whatever that built up, rage and anger was, that's no longer around. Been delivered from that, thankfully, healed from it in the name of Jesus, certainly. Counting my blessings this morning in an attitude of gratitude, certainly important for me to do that. And um, especially in times of such great uncertainty. And I'm not talking about necessarily what's going on in the world, because it seems like no matter what, it's times of great uncertainty with respect to what may be going on in the world. Just looking at the history from 75 when I was born until now, I mean, that seems to be the case. Although with the economic cycles, folks tend to, romanticize certain periods, and that seems to be based, the romanticization of certain periods seems to be almost solely based on, this American dream, so-called idea of which is really something I think, could be certainly, although people will tell me why not, but it seems like it could be built into society, which is a person that's able to show up for work and is willing to work, however many, let's just say 40 hours. I think it should be less for full time, but people say, what do you mean? Well, Germany apparently famously went to something like a 32-hour work week many years ago, from what I understand. But let's just say 40 hours if I'm willing to exchange my valuable, time, humanity, my energies, my efforts, certainly to not, and will be given less money, right, than what my labor's probably worth, in a vacuum, to sign up for my own exploitation. Um, people that the system of employment. It seems like when people, want to romanticize, especially I guess the 80s, the 90s, I guess more so the 90s into the early 2000s, as if that was, some benchmark of progress, in society. Well, the movie The Matrix came out in 1999, so there was already these notions, and I'm sure there have been for quite some time, of being born into slavery and the, psychological prison, and you know, uh, I don't need to explain the movie The Matrix. It's pretty clear to me, this is the system itself perpetuating these notions that everything was hunky dory, um, for that period of time, and that's, not a very long period of time. Uh, you know, 1965 to 1983 is known. That period of time is known by the Federal Reserve as the Great Inflation, and so I don't know exactly when, the economy would have improved. Let's say, and what does improved even mean? But what, late 80s into the, see, I'm thinking you're really looking at mid 90s to maybe mid. What are we looking like 95 to 2005 maybe, or I guess maybe all the way up to '08. That's not that's not it's like one generation. That's not It's not a very long run there. Uh, and then people can become so identified with that, and that did seem to coincide with this idea of, higher education, seeking white collar jobs. That's the way of America, and I do believe that was some of the way that the American people were sold this idea of allowing the jobs to leave the country because these were not good jobs. Right? A factory job's not a good job, right? I've worked on an assembly line. That's not a good job. Okay, I did a summer assembling skill saws for SKIL in Arkansas. Yeah, sure, it's great to have money, or can be, but this idea that, and then how much of the industrialization, how much of the factory work, how much of that industrialization and seeing these blue collar and just menial type of jobs as desirable, how much of that was born out of the culture of the Great Depression, where folks, you know, uh, ex- presumably I wasn't there, but experiencing such a lack of jobs, you know, that, and then the protracted, deprivation of the Great Depression, I could see that, creating a scenario that lasted for many years where people were just happy to have a place to go and toil every day and to have a regular paycheck. And, that doesn't, once the people that went through the Great Depression and then the people who, their children and their children's children, once enough generations, once the populace is far enough removed, that effect is worn off, right? The Depression era mindset, I believe it's known as. And, um, certainly some vestiges of that remain culturally. Boomer coding, I think they call that now. I heard that term this morning. Um, Speaking, boomer coded messages, I find fascinating. It's really probably outdated figures of speech that the youth don't know what you mean. Hmm. Or don't know what not you, don't know what I mean, perhaps, or a boomer. It's interesting to think about, certainly. And then, so coming out of the depression, people just happy to have any job at all, any regular paycheck at all, and then not that many years pass, and now it's WW2, and then of course now it's all hands on deck, all manufacturing. And again, this is the official fiction. I wasn't there. I'm sure, since this is the so-called truth community. I've even had people just straight up tell me that World War II in its entirety was fake, right? So, I mean, it's all on the table, but I'm going official fiction here to at least have a handy frame of reference. And, and also that had a lot to do with, because as we recall, prior to maybe 1960, 65, somewhere in there, um, effectively half of the population, the adult population, was, for all intents and purposes, not in the workforce, meaning, women working jobs wasn't yet normalized. Although, again, certainly World War II would have had something to do with that. And then, so if we look at morality, if we look at religion, and we look at the idea of a Christian nation, you know, if this was a Christian nation and people actually, those people were following the teachings, then what I would ask is, would those, would there, hypothetically, just imagine had Americans said, well, no, we don't go to war. We're Christians. We don't do that. And I'm not talking about the part of life where we debate, the Crusades, and I'm not opening this up for debate. I'm speculating, like in a vacuum, just sort of in a thought experiment. Um, would women have ever fully entered the workforce by now? See, I don't know. I don't know how that works. It's kind of interesting to think about, in a way. Do I need to talk about me more? I don't know. I'm watching the numbers go up and the numbers go down. Not that it matters, but I think maybe my descriptions of the realm and the economic situation and all of this, maybe I've talked about that enough. Um, and I've forgotten I think maybe I thought I was making a bigger point and I've started rambling. Perhaps that's what it is, the rambling. It's like, oh no, he's rambling. I generally keep the rambling fairly focused, but hmm, see if we can backtrack enough to figure out why did I start talking about the Great Depression. Oh, well, it was off of this idea of economically romanticizing the recent past, and that does seem to be system programming, right? The system, it does seem to be a way for the system to sort of keep hope alive for these people, you know, toiling in these jobs, not able to pay all their bills necessarily. And and we know I've been very critical of the spending habits of Americans and the lack of budgeting. And um, when I talk about these economic cycles, I wasn't freely spending in the '90s when I worked full time and had a roommate and paid all my own bills and all of this. I wasn't necessarily on a strict budget. However, I knew, I had like a budget in my mind. I knew um, pretty quickly I had to learn to budget my money to pay the bills. And, even if that was only the budget was in my head. And it certainly seems like, especially with the national religion being consumerism, folks are just accustomed to, you know, and then the advent of the smartphone making it much easier shopping in general, right? Um, yeah, it seems to be just the shopping and the consuming addictions in general, and then the normalization of that, through the system itself. In America, seemingly being consumer-based society. Oh, and that's what I was talking about was the letting the jobs leave the country part. That was when this was the main point I wanted to make. That's when America sold a bill of goods of just, well, go to university, get a 4-year degree, and you are guaranteed, right? A the so-called the white picket fence, um, a home ownership. If people want to get married and have kids, that was available. So that got tied to. So as the great sucking sound of NAFTA, if anybody remembers Ross Perot, as that was happening, it was this change to anybody with half a brain in the school system, right? Well, they're going to college now. That they would be fools not to go to college. And in the modern age, we can forget that it wasn't that long ago in this country that you know. Uh, the undesirability of a lot of jobs, especially, menial blue collar jobs or jobs in the trades or whatever this was, it was based on sort of environmental factors around the weather and just how poor the conditions might be just physically, like the actual, what temperature is it inside the facility or, is it outside work? And, now that's going to be seasonal to some extent. And so, a less industrialized or a less earlier versions of society, how much of this was dependent on weather cycles, what time of year, the seasons, and then this idea of touching grass or back to nature, even in the 1800s, pre-Civil War into the Civil War years. And I heard a statistic, I'm gonna mess this up, but it was like up until maybe the mid 1800s, the average person in America lived on, it was like less than $2 a day or $1 a day or something like that. I need to go look that up. So I'm trying to remember, was that because that would have been a lot of money back then. So that must be in today's money because that would have had to been because $1 was a lot of money in the 1800s. Hmm, comparatively, wonder how much that is. I'm not going to break out the inflation calendar or calculator on you, but yeah, still undetermined if I have something to say or not. We're getting there. right? And so now you have Gen Z arriving into the world in which the boomer code, right? Boomer coding is just, yeah, go get a degree and everything's taken care of. Just go get your degree and then the world opens up. Except it doesn't. The system, this is a time where, the thing that, again, the common sense, the conventional wisdom, the word of mouthing of everything, it's broken down because, yeah, there was a period of time when perhaps that was true. Um, the university education was the key to, entree into the so-called middle class, which never has existed. If people are curious about that, that's the people we think of as middle class. Those are uh, people born into poverty who are temporarily experiencing relative affluence. And yes, it is possible to be born into relative affluence, but that doesn't mean that's not a lasting condition. Wealth, right? Rich folks, people who are actually wealthy, that's a condition that persists. It's not a temporary condition. They're not temporarily rich and then they're not rich. And then just what the system does to people. I saw this, one of these financial audit channels, not Caleb Hammer, but there's another channel, some bozo from France, and this Roman guy, and he had a video recently, or it was like portraying this guy that he was financially auditing as rich, but that was based on the guy's total net worth being $1.8 million, and a million of it was his home because I believe maybe he lived in California or whatever. Like, I guess we still think that's rich. So $1 million, and this is how far behind the thinking is of the average person. Because as soon as I see 1.8 million and rich person, I'm like, well, that's not rich. What are you talking? What are you talking about? Um, and while simultaneously I see notions, it's like, oh, Jay-Z or 50 Cent or whoever, one of these moguls says, if you cannot afford to buy it twice, you can't afford to buy it once. Well, if somebody has 1.8 million in cash, can they afford to buy a house twice, whatever car they're going to buy twice, whatever they're about to go out and buy? If they were to buy it twice, how much of the 1.8 million would be left? And yeah, I understand that there's Mississippi. I'm from Arkansas. I understand there's places in the country where, yes, my hometown, in fact, a halfway decent house is purchasable for around $25,000, and I'm not kidding. Now, it's not what any of it's not what a lot of folks would consider halfway decent. It's halfway decent compared to the area in which it exists. Um, Certainly a very undesirable area, to be sure. And that seems to be the state of just confusion. Again, just the general confusion of the populace. Um, and I see why this is happening, but then simultaneously, this is what the system does to people is, and this is what I talked about yesterday, was delivering a performance in this realm as a being, Benton, right? As a personality, persona, right? With this history, this biography, these characteristics, this voice looking this way, and then here I am in this realm, putting on a performance in my own view of myself. Again, not me, but now I'm doing a thought experiment. You know, well, up until very recently, my own view of myself being almost entirely based on constructed. So my own creative force subverted into creating a self image for myself to then uphold to everybody else, to uphold before society, and to say, have I done a good enough job? Am I worthy of respect? Am I worthy of accolades? Right. And that's all framed in the context of making something of oneself in a vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions. And so the juxtaposition there between, you know, the psychological schism, if a being is able to understand, well, yeah, prior there has been a period of time when, white collar and office jobs and climbing the corporate ladder and higher education, for a time it did seem to allow poor people to temporarily experience relative affluence. Well, that time seems to have passed, although in America, at least based on what I've seen in my life, there's always opportunity for for certain folks, right? For certain folks to to rise from poor to affluent, which is still not a lasting condition. Um, Although it could be, right? It just sort of depends on the timing. And I think that's part of the harm of the idea of the so-called American dream is this idea that there can't be any problems, there can't be any complaints because this is the so-called greatest country with the greatest opportunities. And but then also with the nerfing and the safe spacing and the anti-bullying, right? Not really able to break it down into winners and losers. So now treating the losers, it's obvious who the losers are, right? The losers in society, and I mean based on winning is we're only measuring in money. So to win is to go out and to serve the vacuous, delusory adversarial realm of business transactions sufficient enough to be rewarded with a certain amount of Federal Reserve notes. Again, the creating of an image to uphold, before Moloch and all the people here to say, have I done good enough? Is this good enough? Can I now be accepted into the club? Can I now be, a can I be redeemed? Really, it's redemption via performance, and it's performing in such a way to preclude the individual from, the individual almost never in each new moment serving this system. When is the moment when the individual is properly identified, with the love and creation, right, within them that, again, this is me speaking of my own true knowledge of self, you know, Nancy Pelosi's MS-13 spark of divinity. If these other people, you know, have that within them, even if it's undiscovered, um, where is the opportunity? Now, there's a lot of fakery going on, right? There's a lot of fake it till you make it, and there's a lot of people mimicking the behaviors, I would say, of creative love or love, right? Love expressed in the moment, you know, based on proper identification or, based on not defining one's. Because what I would say, this is just my opinion, is, and it's probably true though, is, you know, all beings who are primarily identified in relation to this place, I would say it virtually prevents them from expressing love and bringing forth love and treating the people around them lovingly, right? And that's a tough pill to swallow because how much energy, how much effort, how much saving of face and keeping up appearances, because see, I don't do this for again, show me a human, I'll show you a hypocrite. I'm sure I've done it at times, but generally speaking, and maybe it's in part the undiagnosed fake autism, I've put little to no effort into this for the entire course of my life. This sort of fawning, appreciation and expressions of love and respect and all of this. And I'm coming to understand that it's almost all performative. There's the word. It's almost all performative with no real actual substance. So what good is it? But well, in a world of lies, it's typical, I would say. That's typical in a world of lies where, again, back to my sphere of influence, that's where I have nearly unlimited power within myself. And I'm coming to understand now that once I begin to observe and address and operate or interoperate with the external, and the external meaning everything that's not within my own sphere of influence, meaning everything I don't have power over, right? Everything that, within this delusion, Benton doesn't have power over, um, is lies, right? At least partially. So ultimately, my only opportunity to step into, not a big fan of that phrase, but to manifest truth, or to live in truth, or to live truth, right, is within myself. That's always, if I'm not there, right, if my focus and attention and identification and alignment, mind, body, and spirit, if it's not within myself, working with my own energies, um, and my own talents and abilities, right? And functioning again based on proper identification within myself, based on what I know myself to be, which is one with the same thing that the religions refer to as, let's just, we've been pussyfooting. Let's just call it what it is. It's that what I am is one with what the religions, you know, refer to as like the Alpha and the Omega, right? The Creator, you know. That's what I am. And that's so valuable. That's so authoritative. That's so substantive, right? Words I can spell and can't pronounce. Substa, substantive. Let's mispronounce it because I can't pronounce it properly. Substantive. Um, and in inverted world, you know, uh, it's a bit of a mind fuck. So this is where I do have something to say, I believe. So we've solved the mystery. It can be a bit of a mind fuck for somebody like me, or for me particularly, because now it's like, okay, yeah, there is no meaning for me, or is there meaning for me externally within this realm? And I would say the potential is there via service. I would say without the mechanism of service, that no, there's not meaning to be found. Now, I have at times found meaning in, well, okay, let me say that there's no meaning to be found externally while staying external, meaning what I can observe and take, what I can transfer from the external into the internal and then work with. Yes, there's meaning possible, but the meaning is still within myself, if that makes sense. And now we're back to what I would not consider to be a problem, because I don't know that it's going to be a problem. In fact, I think it's probably going to be a solution to um, me actually getting around to serving, right? Which is my purpose, apparently, to be of service. And I can get into more specifics on that, but I won't right now. But it's this notion of, there's really, what is there for me to focus on externally? What is there for me to go and do externally? Other than almost everything that comes to mind is going to be based in money, earning of money. This idea of, or even worse, oh, settle down. And I've always hated that expression. When are you going to settle down? Or just people suggesting that as an option of settling down. It's like, which means a very specific thing in our culture, in our society. But that phrase always rubbed me the wrong way. I was never a fan of that one. Um, Settling down, and it's like, this is where Gen X, where they're forever young, starts showing. It's like, what, I'm 50. What do you mean settle? What are you talking about? I've lived my life at this point. You know, like, for real. I was born into a particular time, a particular place, a particular set of circumstances with particular, characteristics, and, went through my whole deal, and that's been over with. That's that was all fully lived by the time I was like 45, right? And then it's been the last however many years, and then the struggles were happening, up until that point, the, spiritual seeking, and the, being lost to some extent in various ways, but then productively using my time and resources, um, to grow and change and evolve and transcend, the limitations of my birth, right? And in a lot of ways, I'm seeing this as, that is one of the major missions I don't know if that's for everybody, but certainly my life was this, born with the potential to transcend these limitations. And as far as I can tell, until I meet another person like me that came from a similar background and is able to address these topics and all of these things, I'm going to assume I'm the only one until proven otherwise. That's okay. But so it's not a problem necessarily, and I don't even know that I would call it a challenge. It's a difference, and it's the fact that part of the reason I'm complaining about how I feel this morning is I've been laying around my car doing not much of anything over the weekend, and probably last week, the end of last week, and I'm certainly not a lazy person. I'm able to practice laziness at times. And rest is good, and a lot of it has been enjoyable. But now my body's sending me the signals, and I'll certainly listen to them. Hey, it's time to get moving there, Bubba. And you know, laying about's over for now, or at least, hey, give us a week of walking, and then go back to laying about for all we care. It's probably what my knees are saying. And I do sleep, in the fetal position more or less, and in the back seat of a car. So, but I'm not a victim of that. But um, at a certain point, enough nights, and I'm figuring out that enough nights in a row of that, it definitely has a cumulative effect. But so the back to the actual issue is like what to do with myself, and realistically, some of this is my own, unwillingness or inability to just, pull the ripcord or tear the band-aid off and just, more or less just freely wander with, a very small, uh, basically my bedding and then whatever little bit of cookware, and then I guess socks and underwear. And as somebody who's an expert at carrying all of their belongings on their back every single day, everywhere they go, uh, I can mentally figure out like what all of that's going to weigh, and then after this chronic illnesses and such, and just so many years of 10 I'm not exaggerating, this was 10 miles a day with 35 or more pounds on my back, every single day for many years. And I enjoy it personally, or I did enjoy it, I should say. I definitely burned out on the carrying of the pack part of it. Just, I've gotten as much out of that as I'm ever going to get, if that makes sense. So, I'm looking at probably not ever wanting to go over 20 pounds. Uh, the thing about clothes is, man, clothes are so heavy that clothes weigh the most. That's another thing that somebody learns, that one learns when they live that lifestyle. Clothes weigh the most, right? Other than, water or whatever, but I can carry that. But yeah, clothes weigh more than anything. So, that's most likely in the cards for me, although it's not up to me, right? It's, again, a lot of this comes back to the idea of surrender and working within the yin, the feminine, the yin form, the passive, the accepting, the surrender, right? The trust, you know, how much in the so-called truth community, especially certain channels, do we hear about the trust, right? Well, what I am is the trust. I'm bona fide. That's the thing is, I like to say I'm no account, right? I'm no count, meaning I don't have an account. Yeah, I'm no count with respect to this uh, vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, right? But I got my bona fides, right, outside of the context of a delusion. I got my bona fides, and maybe you do too, right? Perhaps I'm not the only one. Doesn't have to be the philosophy of solipsism necessarily, right? Doesn't have to be. Let me check my batteries real quick. I think we're still good. And hang on, check the battery levels. Yeah, we're looking good. StreamYard doesn't seem to be quite so sensitive. Maybe they finally heard my complaints. It used to be if I just barely touched my phone screen, it would kick me out of StreamYard. It no longer does that. So back to, well, what am I to do with myself? And I understand that there's a lot of fear around homelessness in general. There's a lot of fear around just, the uncertainty and the how uncomfortable it would be. Like, oh my God, like just wandering around with, basically um, a bivy sack, a sleeping bag, uh, at least one wool blanket. I have two right now, but again, as soon as I get tired of carrying a certain amount of weight, you know, one of the two blankets will be one of the first things to go. But um, and again, like I have like 16 pairs of these diabetes socks. I've got some fairly lightweight cookware, like a little stove, um, titanium fucking cups and pots, and of course, I have to have a kettle, right, a tea kettle, and and then also these eggs, man. So a lot of this is needed to happen, but I'm addicted to these egg yolks, and I want to get into that too. So I certainly have something to say about that, but let me not get too far off track. Well, every once in a while, when I was living, carrying the rucksack, and it was in some ways, it certainly was Fight Club notion of that things you own end up owning you. And every once in a while, I would meet a person who more or less lived the same lifestyle I was living, but with just nothing, with effectively no possessions. And that really appealed to me, and I never just I just never had the cojones. And that's typically speaking, I do pretty well in the cojones department, but just never had the huevos to just say fuck it and live that way. And I've had a lot of opportunities and I even could have done it, and maybe in the future too, but I certainly had the chance to do that with money, right? Just imagine, just get rid of everything, but then have several, say $7,000, that would have been an interesting experiment. That would have been a way to ease into that lifestyle, but I appear to be easing into it now by just, you know, I have just no concerns around getting an income or acquiring an income. Although I'm certainly open to um, income sources that don't, and I'm not asking for suggestions. I mean, I'm open to it generally. Income sources that don't involve the government, right? What would Jesus do? What wouldn't Jesus do? Pretty sure he would not be paying for all of this with his own blood, sweat, and tears and efforts, right? But yeah, it's really the problem of what to do with oneself, and again, out so so many people, and so when I predict the response of the listener, and I don't necessarily mean you as you listen individually, just broadly, um, everything that comes to mind as far as what to do with oneself, that's not just going to be leisure activities, and I've leisured enough. I've had enough leisure since I quit my truck driving job. And that's, the idea of becoming a man of leisure or whatever, that's, I'm going to have to do something at some point. But it seems to me like most of what people would try to come up with to do, like, okay, what now? What to actually do with one's day? Well, those people, identifying and defining themselves in relation to a vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, a lot of that's probably going to be based in what? Guilt, right? The guilt of not producing for the system in a given period of time. How much guilt and shame is involved in that? See, I'm now completely outside of that. And realistically, that's not something that's affected me much anyway compared to other people. But, at times, certainly. Um, but so removed from notions around, I have, as if I have some sort of responsibility or obligation to be productive for society. No, I do not. I have absolutely no obligation to prove my worth as a man via hard work. That's bullshit. Okay. I know at least one person that I've met first through this channel and then spent time with in real life who's a little older than me. And from what I can tell, was socialized to where part of being a man is the man must go out and be productive pretty much every day, right? Or within that period, he actually loses some of his man status, right? To me, it just doesn't make any sense. Is that again? So I guess I am a slave, right? I was brought here to this realm to produce value for the realm. And this is where the Christian notions in my mind become so harmful. It's the tying in, but as much as people want to talk about the separation of church and state, it's tying in a person's worth and value with labor, right? Laboring for the very system, producing for the very system that, as far as I can tell, the core central theme of the teachings of the person who is credited with founding or inspiring, right, the religion itself of Christianity was opposed to. So as we can see, that's the system yet again co-opting and managing and controlling a movement, right, and subverting it. So a movement that initially, again, we're going official fiction, but that grew out of a historical Jesus and performing miracles and being crucified, risen from the dead. I believe it was 3 days later. Um, and then ascending to heaven in the story of the Bible and all of these things. And yes, this is, this is what I hold, right? Um, for my own specific purposes, within my own sphere of influence, not in a obligatory way, not in a now I'm attached to groups of people way because I hold certain notions, right? I'm not beholden to certain notions. See the difference? I'm holding it. I'm holding it dear. I'm holding it close to my heart, right? And maybe that's what Christ is. Maybe that's what Christ is. I don't know. Could be. So can the listener, right? Can the listener, even conceptualize or intellectualize what I'm talking about? What to do with one's time outside of a context of producing, outside of a context of earning money to then purchase things, or even just to improve, one's so-called lot in life, right? Um, and again, I'm almost 50. I've lived my life. Like, if I had some strong desire for a particular type of life or a particular, you know, um, vocation, right? Could I get some sort of training and go into a vocation from now until I'm 70 or whatever? Yeah, hypothetically, assuming my health is what I think it is now, after proclaiming that I wasn't going to live very much longer several years ago, but now, and that was, that's how serious the situation was at the time. And I would argue that in order for me to approach, that was the mental approach I had to take in order to deal with these very serious illnesses without going to doctors, right, and receiving healing, and more or less back to what would be considered normal as far as I can tell, you know, overall. So if one is even able to set aside, what to do with oneself, based on these notions outside of serving the system in some way. And in fact, this is what I found was the greatest challenge when I was many years ago, still when I was in the process of adapting to homelessness, right? It's not all of the fear-based things that people assume, Oh my God, the panic mode of, well, where am I going to get this? Where am I going to take a shower? Where am I going to eat? What am I going to do? How am I going to get across town? Blah, just and on and on and on, the problem solving. And I did enjoy the problem solving aspects of living that lifestyle, certainly. Um, and that was good for me individually. But actually, the number one challenge is, what do I do with all this free time? And now having, before homelessness, almost always involved in employment or other scheduled activities, right? And or other scheduled activities and societal obligations, 20, almost 20 straight years in relationships with women, cohabitating with women in the context of a romantic relationship. Hang on, I think my kidneys are telling me to drink a little water here. I'm not thirsty though. It's the problem. Oh yeah, back to the egg talk. Well, actually, let me finish this up and then maybe I'll get to the egg talk. So, so I can see actually when I got here I guess last year, last summer, when I got to Los Angeles, I could see the writing was on the wall. Um, especially as I see these folks, some of these local people who've been here for years, I'm assuming in the same area of the city, and they neither reap nor sow nor gather into barns, and yet the Lord feeds them anyway, right? And they're mostly nonverbal types and keep to themselves and do their thing, and maybe some of them drink alcohol or do drugs or whatever, but they don't seem to be causing problems to anybody, and probably some mental illness and maybe some schizophrenia and possibly, although these people I'm thinking of in particular have not exhibited any of those characteristics. Maybe they've healed, maybe they've had their own healing, right? And maybe these are all kind of versions of me in a way, meaning, people that have, maybe they've discovered their own versions of what I talk about on here, and maybe in a, could be in a far less intellectualized version, back to the philosopher Alan Watts, famous and theologian Alan Watts, the famous, one of his examples was, if somebody from he said Arkansas, if somebody from Arkansas has, uh, what they would probably call baptism in the Holy Spirit, or, a direct experience of Christ, you know, lacking the intellectual framework, in only able to process that in a Christian context. Next thing you know, they're running around telling everybody that they're Jesus, right? And Alan Watts tells a joke, and he says, well, and then of course people say, no, you're not, and then the guy just says, well, that's what y'all said to Jesus. And then how do you answer that? And meaning, yeah, well, when Jesus was here, he was put to death, basically, is what that's a reference to, for sedition, but not necessarily for claiming to be God, right? Although I don't know, maybe there wasn't, with the church and state being so in league with one another. Maybe that would have been considered sedition at the time. I don't know. Not that I'm not saying Jesus overtly said that in the Bible. I'd have to go back and look, but so let's not get Benton on a gotcha. I'm just talking here, right, off the dome. Um, So yeah, I suspect at some point in the near future, I'll probably keep sleeping in the car as long as that's practicable. I think at some point, as more and more of my possessions flee or fly away from me, um, over time, as I'm able to get rid of more things, the things I own do end up owning me to some extent, it seems. But um, maybe at some point reconfigure the insides of this car where I'll actually be able to stretch out. That's a possibility. How long have we been rambling? Oh, not even an hour yet. Good deal. And there's been a few donations. We're trying to decide, the Royal We are trying to decide what to do about the StreamYard. Um, I don't know if I want to try to buy a month or not. I'd say if I can get another $20 before I run out of, if I have another $20 by the time I run out of this, well, I'd say $30 because I'm having to manage this because I'm in the process of running out of money. It won't be too much longer. Although I am quite frugal, so um, the little bit of money I have left, I know how to stretch it. But so that's going to be a bit of a challenge, right? Actually having, I think it's $45 for StreamYard. Actually having $45 that I can spend, uh, in spite of the donations, I don't really have a way to segregate those. It's just in my Cash App, which is where, you know, most of my money's been, or much of my money's been. So, not that I had much. Um, so we'll see. I'm definitely open to another month of StreamYard if folks feel like donating, so I can continue to ramble. Because what else is there to do at this point? Uh, and that's another reason I went live. It's like, well, I know later on today I've got a few things I'll be doing. Um, and at this point, it's like, I like walking in the hot sun. The only real drawback to that is I might have to do my laundry a little more frequently if I stink up all my shirts too fast, right? Um, sweating through my clothes, but it's like, what else am I going to do? What else am I going to do? And I'm starting to wonder if YouTube's just gives me fake numbers on the viewers because it seems like I can tell I'm putting less energy in the last few minutes, and the numbers have dropped slightly, but then like I'll get going again and the numbers go up, or it's funny just to watch that. It's probably doing both things, probably being manipulated in a way to, and I don't know, does YouTube even make a profit on my little channel? I don't know. I don't know how that works. But yeah, the eggs. Also, I'm addicted to these egg yolks at this point, and I've been wanting to do some fasting, and I really haven't been eating much of anything other than these egg drinks, and that might have something to do with why that and not walking and sleeping in this car. It might also have something to do with my joints hurting a little more, not getting enough nutrients, perhaps. But yeah, also I have no idea because the egg yolks had so much to do with specific improvements in my health that I'm kind of curious to see what's it going to be like when I stop eating these things, when I stop taking in so many eggs every day, egg yolks. It seems to me like I'm healed and I'm back to normal, or what would pass for normal as far as my digestion and not getting sick from certain foods. Although I'm still going to be avoiding the seed oils and all of that for the most part. But at a certain point, it's just going to be like, hey, man, here's fucking, do you want this half a loaf of bread? And it's like, yeah, if there's bad oils in it, there's really nothing I'm going to be able to do about it. It's just like, yeah, I'm eating the bread, right? So it'll be interesting to see uh, how my body adapts to not having eggs all the time, 3 or 4 times a day, egg yolks. But yeah, at this point, I would say that's majorly what's appealing to me is just sort of wandering, and I do like to walk and just kind of wander around. Um, and while I still have the car, don't necessarily have to drag my belongings with me, but yeah, the car is definitely in the long run. Its days are numbered, certainly, but it's all numbered, right? All the days are numbered in the long run. Um, and I don't know that I'm in a big fat hurry to get up out of this realm, but the motivation to be in the realm is not, it's just not there anymore, right? Like, and maybe that goes away with the not being so strongly, not relating to the realm so strongly anymore. Although I am at times, and certainly it shows. I did almost an entire stream recently talking about the fucking system. And I could tell later on when I thought about it, I could tell I got swept away and was identified with it. It's easy to lapse back into that, right? Um, but it seems to me like overall, what has happened within me, to facilitate whatever the next phase is going to be, has happened, and now it's calmly, peacefully, you know, patiently, but not an active exercise of patience, right? Just with you know passive patience, if that makes sense. Passively, just sort of waiting for the next phase. Although maybe this is it already, who knows? So that's where old Benton's at, if anybody's curious, and it's all blessings, right? The only time it's not all blessings is when the individual allows themselves to be subverted or incentivized or coerced or tricked or out of ignorance, right? Serves, uh, antithesis, serves this realm instead of serving the Most High, right? Um, and I think I was trying to make a different point, and I got so long winded there. By the time I got to the end, it was a different point being made, but I think it's probably okay. And what does it look like? The predictive programming around, notions of victory and oh, conqueror, as if, life is something, because some justification could be made for, well, he's conquered life, in a certain way, right? But I reject that, actually. I don't look at it that way. Um, Again, that gets into the adversarial elements of the realm, right? The concepts of winners and losers. I don't view when I say that I'm going to assume I'm the only person that was born into the circumstances I was born into that transcended. Until I meet another one, I'm going to assume I'm the only one. Well, I don't consider, right, in the way that I might claim victory, spiritually. I don't then consider the folks that didn't overcome. I don't view them as losers, right? To me, it's not an adversarial thing. It's the potential, right? Because the ones who are still here, they still have the potential to overcome and transcend those limitations, right? It's still there, and that's just me as an individual. That's what gets me excited, is that there's the potential to accomplish these things. So that's what actually brought me to the recent, um, within the last 6 months. I'm not so good with keeping up with the timelines, but or I haven't been in the past, I should say. Um, I lost my train of thought. More trains of thought entered the station. Which one is about to leave is the question. I don't know. It's still quite early. It's only 8 a.m. here. 8:12. So, what does one do when there's, nothing that really must be done other than, again, basic functions? Um, that's an interesting thing to think about. Maybe it's just I am the doing, right? I am the doing. Takes a lot of the pressure off, certainly. A lot less. Uh, I'm not quite as tense as I was at the start of this thing. Seemed to be whatever was bothering me seems to have left. So, you know, there is some value in these live streams, certainly, uh, for me as well. And with the time being limited, I will take my leave so that future broadcasts may occur. And again, not begging. I've certainly done plenty of e-begging, just putting it out there. If anybody feels compelled to donate, um, most of the donators already know how to donate. and that will perhaps go towards the StreamYard in the near future. I would say so, if I can, especially another $30 or so pretty quickly. But I'd like to use up this whatever's left. I think I got maybe 10 hours, 8 hours left on the free time. But either way, um, I suppose I could always pre-record these some other way and then upload them as a video, not as a live stream. But I do enjoy the StreamYard side of things. Works pretty well for me. Um, certainly. So anyway, appreciate it. Thanks for watching. Bye.